Hey, it's Christina, and today we are going to talk all about flopped hydrangeas. There are three main reasons why they do it, and I'm going to tell you just what to do to make sure they get right back on track. Now, the first reason has everything to do with pruning. This is about smooth and panicle hydrangeas because those are the only two types that should be pruned because big leaf, oak leaf, mountain, any vining ones, those all flower on old wood, so they really shouldn't be pruned. They can be deadheaded, but you're not going to cut back into them. The ones that are being cut back into are more likely to flop if they're pruned too hard. We only recommend that they be pruned back by 1/3 of their total height and width, and you thin out the spindly inner branches. But if they're cut back too hard, they'll respond by producing a lot of new growth that is then weak and green, and by the time that they put blooms on, they might flop over because the blooms are so heavy, or they might flop over only when there's a heavy wind or rain. If you need some reference for how to prune that way, we'll link 2 videos below, one for each type. Now, the second reason is about fertilizer. So we love fertilizer because generally to us it means more flowers. But if you over-fertilize, you actually might be doing your plant a disservice because it will use that fertilizer to grow more stems and more foliage, as well as maybe some more flowers. But with that excessive growth, it's doing the same thing as the pruning. It's going to be weak and it's going to flop over if the flowers are too heavy or if there is a storm. So the answer is correct fertilizing, or less fertilizing than you might think. Shrubs are actually a lot less hungry than most people think. With a hydrangea, you could get away with fertilizing it just once per year. You can do it in the springtime. Follow the directions on the bag. So don't apply more than necessary, even though it might feel like you're really going to give the plant a boost. I have had to rein myself in. So if you have over-fertilized, don't worry, just don't apply more, maybe not even the next year, just the year following. Now, one caveat for that is hydrangeas in containers, because they are going through their nutrient stores faster than plants in the ground. If you do have a hydrangea in a container or a hydrangea that doesn't seem to be flowering as much, there might be reasons for that, but you could also apply a second dose of fertilizer in early summer. Now, we don't recommend fertilizing anytime after mid to late July for areas in like the north, the east, northwest, but if you live in the west or the south, you pretty much have free reign if you needed to apply a fertilizer application in later summer. My final note on fertilizer is that less is more. You can't go back and get it from the ground after it's been watered in. So just with a light hand, that's all. And now for the third reason. This is sun exposure. A hydrangea needs to receive at least 4 hours of direct sunlight right onto its foliage, or all-day dappled light. If it doesn't receive that, it's going to either stretch out its growth to try and reach that light, or it's just not going to grow as vigorously because it doesn't have the energy it needs to produce strong stems. You'll often notice this is the case if there's a lot of stem length between each set of leaves. Sun exposure also has to do with plant spacing. If a plant is too close to its neighbor, and they're roughly the same size, they will battle each other to try and get the sunlight that's available, and thus stretch out and flop over. And now, what do you do about a plant that isn't receiving enough light? If it's the spacing issue, where the plants are too close together, you can move one of them a little farther away. If it's a location issue, you can just transplant it to a totally different spot. The best times for transplanting are the spring and the fall. That is when the temperatures are the best. They're the easiest for the plant to get established in the new space. They're not going to have as much heat stress. They're not going to lose as much water from transpiration. It's just a lot easier on the plants and the gardener. If you need a little help with transplanting, that we have a link about that below. And now I have the perfect example of a flopped hydrangea group, and I'm going to go over there and show you just what to do with them so you can mimic the same thing with your hydrangeas. So here is our slightly floppy hydrangea hedge. So there are 4 plants here, and these are the 2 that are most noticeably flopping, and they're planted closer together than these 2 are. So I would say that the solution here could also be transplanting them a little farther apart So in the future, they have more space to get the sunlight that each plant needs. In the meantime, the most important thing is to set your flopped hydrangeas up for future success. And the way to do that is to get these flopped stems upright so they harden in place. So by the time that the next spring rolls around, they will be upright and you can prune them the correct way, and they will have a good sturdy base to start from that next season. There are two ways to achieve this. The first is with staking. So I will stake one of these hydrangeas and show you what that process looks like. The second is with pruning. You can deadhead these big, beautiful flowers off of your plant, relieve some of that weight that flimsier stem is having trouble handling, and bring them inside for an arrangement, or you could dry them for decor in the fall or the winter. So we will start off with staking, and I'll show you just what that looks like with a few materials. You might have to go get them from a hardware store, but my favorite things to use are these. Some garden stakes. These are bamboo, they're painted green, so they'll blend in a little bit easier with the plant, and some green garden twine. Green for the same reason, but if you have tan of those things too, that's fine. Another thing I like to use for staking or training are these locking ties. So these are great for training things up. They can have an individual stem in them, but I'm actually going to use the twine this time because there are so many branches. It would take way too many of these to use. If your hydrangea doesn't have that many stems that are drooping, you could use one of these and some stakes. So the process that I'm going to use for this larger hydrangea is I'm going to put a few stakes right in the center area. It might damage a few roots, but it's pretty negligible because they heal quite fast. I'm going to use a few stakes because there are so many stems, and I'm actually going to not cut the twine for each branch, because if I just am able to loop it around quite a few times, that creates a sturdier hold and less waste, because if you don't cut this, you can reuse it in the future. So you will move the stems of the hydrangea back, set your stake close to the center of the plant, or if the lean is really bad, you can set it on the other side of the root ball so that it's farther away. You get more tension away from the stem that you're trying to train. In this case, we're going to put it right here. I like to tie a little knot like this around the bamboo stake. If you are using bamboo stakes, I like to go down so that you're just under one of those little bumps, because it kind of keeps the string from slipping. Tie another knot. And then when you go to put it around one of the stems, you can use it right under a set of leaves. You can put that rope right under a set of leaves. Now, these leaves are pretty fragile, so it is easy to snap them off. Don't feel too bad. So I've got my stake here. I'm going to stake this branch up. I'm putting the string around the base of that set of leaves so that it will snag either on that set of leaves if they stay, or on the at the very least on that bump if the leaves get ripped off. And you'll kind of just make it tight like that. So from that point, you'll either go on to another stem and keep the string going, or if you have put a couple more stakes in the area, you can kind of loop it back to one of those to provide even more support. And then just keep working from stem to stem and loop it around. Occasionally, you're going to want to tie the string to either the stem or the stake. It will make it a little bit harder to take apart in the springtime, but it's going to make the whole little web, the network of strings, stronger, even as you have inclement weather. That occasionally tying a knot will keep it all together. Now, if you have a lot of stems to tie up, don't be afraid to just cut the string and start again with the remaining stems. Place as many stakes as you need. In the end, you are the only person who's really going to know that there are stakes in here, and from a distance, they will look upright and beautiful. So here we are. This plant is staked up, that one's not, and the process was not easy, and you will do a lot of crouching, but I think it's worthwhile to get a hydrangea to stand up, and you get to keep some of the blooms. but not all of them, because I had 3-foot tall stakes and this plant could have easily used 4-foot tall stakes. But to relieve some of that pressure, I am going to cut some of the flowers off so that it can continue to harden upright. Now, if you didn't want to do all of that, you could try pruning off the flowers first and see if that helps lighten the load enough for it to get upright. So we'll do that. When you are going to gather flowers off of your hydrangea, and if you wanted to use them in an arrangement, I would recommend going out in the morning or the evening so that they have the most moisture in them and they'll stay pretty for the longest. You're going to take your hydrangea, follow the stem down to a nice set of leaves. In this case, you will just look for the point where it kind of starts to flop and cut back down that far. So you'll do that until you see if you have removed the load. So we have cut off all the flowers from this flopped side, and as you can see, the branches sprung back up, and that's what we want. We want them to be in that upright position and harden so that next spring they will be solid and ready to get a tiny little prune and be sturdy for the next flower show to come. This does count as a little bit of pruning for your next spring pruning. We like for folks to only take off 1/3 of the height and width whenever they prune, whether it's that late fall or very early spring. So since you've already pruned a little bit, you can just give it a light all over prune in the springtime. Make sure to cut out any spindly branches that are not showing themselves right now. And when you go to make those cuts, you are going to look at the buds, the leaf bud swelling in the springtime, and choose the ones that are the most robust so that those are the active points of growth for the plant. But yeah, you don't have to prune as hard as you would normally in the springtime. And that is our job done. There are 2 methods for you to use to set your hydrangea up for future success. If you have any questions, ask in the comments below. Visit ProvenWinnersColorChoice.com for more amazing information just like this, or like and subscribe and see a little bit more. I'll see you again next time.